All right, big episode of the Shea Anything Podcast coming your way. I'm back from, I guess, Safari. We'll get into that if you listen to Andy and Keith's episode. But there's a lot to talk about with the Mets. The bullpen's performing. deGrom's on the injured list, but that may be a good thing. We'll explain why. And what happened on Friday night, we'll dig into that a little bit. It's all coming up. Shea Anything Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everybody. A reminder to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. I've seen some new reviews come in. We always appreciate that. Some positive, some negative. But as long as you're leaving them, they're constructive. And if you rate us, that helps too on Apple.
What was one negative thing that was said that you recall?
I knew
Let's
you were
try
going
to make that
me.
better.
I don't think we need to talk about that mid.
I want to shore it up. Whatever it is, unless it's like we need new personnel.
I'll talk to you about it after.
Oh boy, it must be bad.
Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Did you really have to say that not only was I on Safari, and keep in mind I was gone for 3 days. Not only was I on Safari, but I was hunting in Africa. Like that's the one
Keith
thing.
Might have said hunting. I think I'm not sure. We'd have to go back.
I was listening. I honestly,
I don't think I would have done that to you.
As I'm at baggage claim yesterday, and I'm like, wow, not only am I coming back from Zimbabwe, as one of you put it, I am coming back from a hunting trip. I've never hunted.
People hunt.
Yeah, but I don't think you're even allowed to hunt in Africa. Anyway, that opened up a whole can of worms. But
well, you are, I'm sure, if you know the right people, which I assume you do. Oh, we're doing it again.
I was, on a regular long weekend, not in Africa. But I did enjoy listening to the two of you guys. Thank you for your Verizon read. Again, 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Was so monotonous and monotone.
Okay.
Mix it up. Like that would be my advice to you. Keith said you did well, but he's not going to crush you. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
This episode of the Shea Anything Podcast is brought to you by my favorite network. I get my phone from them. I get my Wi-Fi, my cable, Verizon. 5G built right for the Mets, for the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You were just,
you're a professional broadcaster and this is your skill. So I would be the first to admit that you're better than I am at that type of thing.
Right.
I think when you said my favorite, you laid it on a little thick where people would maybe doubt the authenticity of
here's the thing. You can doubt the authenticity all you want, but the only reason people are able to hear me right now on Zoom is because my Verizon connection is so strong.
So that was an authentic comment. So
yes.
You've just said it, but I think that when you go off copy to be extra positive, you risk making the audience go like, oh man, this phony's laying it on thick.
Well, yeah, some podcasts too are like, these are the softest boxers I've ever worn.
That's right.
I will never go back to briefs. Like, come on. Okay, so let's start with the 3-batter rule. Andy, a quick story for you. I told you this briefly in the newsroom.
Yes, this is fun.
I traveled on Friday, which is why I couldn't do the podcast. I kind of unpack and went out to dinner. And I come back from dinner, and the Mets game was over, and I watched the kind of 4.5-minute MLB app highlight, which are great. And I'm like, am I having a stroke? Who got the walk-off hit? Who is this person whose shirt is off?
Patrick something or other, yeah.
And okay, so there's a fight in the tunnel, and people are tweeting about rats and raccoons. Okay, a lot to unpack. And I was like, how does one whose job it is to pay attention to the Mets take – I didn't even take 24 hours off. I read your article about Khalil Lee in the morning. I'm totally wired in, and that happened. I missed 4 hours.
Well, they tried to call up Khalil Lee, and there were some logistical issues, and went a different way.
Okay, so – here's what I've talked to you about this briefly on Friday night. Everyone who's listening has heard ad nauseum a bunch of takes on what happened. Not just the fight, what was said in the press conference. And what I've been thinking about yesterday, Andy, since we talked about it briefly on Baseball Night in New York, is the story has been the bogus story that they told, right? That's been, well, should they have done that? Did it draw extra attention to it, et cetera? That's been the lead on national baseball shows.
Which is, to Zach Scott's point, that's where they messed up so badly, was that people were talking about that instead of their good baseball playing. Right. But yeah, that has been the story.
You're right. The 5-game winning streak got overshadowed by that. However, you had two of the Mets' best players and most notable players fight in the tunnel, right?
Well, finish your thought, but I have something to say about it.
Right. We think.
Yeah.
Lindor's story afterwards, I think, has been viewed by people like us to say, wow, they really thought that was a good idea. They really thought we'd buy that. Is there a chance that they knew nobody would take that seriously? That, like, let's just come up with a fun story. Everyone knows it was probably a fight. We're just going to say something that everyone will think is bogus. Like, are we not giving them the benefit of the doubt and saying, I'm sure they knew we'd make a mockery of it, and we kind of took it too seriously?
I didn't take it seriously. I don't think you took it seriously. Look, we've got our own lives. Like, we're not, like, as do a lot of people, we're not, like, personally upset that they made something up. Neither was Todd Zeal on Friday night when he said, "Don't insult our intelligence" on the post game. We're not, like, offended.
No, but it's
just like, it's like, ugh, that's, I think, how everyone felt when they saw those news conferences. And to your question, like, I have no idea if they thought it would be seen as believable or silly. I don't know the answer to that, because all we get is such an example of the absence of access, as we like to brand it. I mean, I can tell you, when I was a beat writer, there would have been a handful of players that were bothered by how that went down, and you would have talked quietly to those players off to the side, and they would have told you the real story, and we would have written some good stuff about how that was playing out in the clubhouse and how it came together. And in Zoom times, the team can manage access to the point where we couldn't really get that information.
As much as I would love to know what really happened, I think there's a 90% chance that in that press conference, we would not have learned it, right? Like, maybe you would have learned it
we would have learned it through reporting.
Right. You would have learned it by asking questions separate from the news conference. So that's, I guess, why I think Todd hit it on the head. That's exactly what I would have said if I were him in that position. However, if I'm Francisco Lindor and I come out and I tell a tale about mixing up a raccoon and a rat, two animals who look totally different, and then I hear Todd Zeal saying, "Don't insult our intelligence," if I'm Lindor, I'm like, wait, I didn't think you would think I was being serious. Does that make sense? Like, it is such a far-fetched story.
That's fair.
Inside the realm of possibility that, like, that's what if he had said something closer to reality that wasn't true, maybe I would have been like, that's a really bad decision. But the fact that he made up an animal, like, I just didn't even go there. I didn't go to a place where I was like, he's trying to get us to believe it.
No, I don't. It's a good point, and I don't know the answer to that. That's a fair point. I just think it was more like baseball people. And again, I want to be clear. I am not offended. I am not offering my opinion. But like Todd Zeal, Mark DeRosa on a different network. I forgot the name. Plenty of people, believe me, like current.
You read a text on
I read a text. It's just like
prominent player.
Baseball people, and not like, when I say baseball people, I'm not talking about like the people who roll their eyes at Fernando Tatis. I'm talking about like a lot of different types of people in baseball.
Right.
So it's not that kind of thing, first of all. But it's like, oh brother, just say, you know what? Families have arguments. We're a family. I'm not going to get into the details of what happened in that tunnel, but we're passionate and we're going to move on and we're better for it. Okay, cool, man. Great. Thanks. Right. Not like blah, 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 rap, blah, 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 raccoon. It's just a bunch of BS. And it was deflating, I think, to people who maybe want to like these guys, that they would take that approach.
But by the way, I think an important point that you and I have kind of made together is that the press conference probably would have been like, well, let's keep that internal.
Yeah, but you man up at the press conference and you say, here's what happened. We're not going to get into detail.
Right. And
We're
then
good.
and your job is to figure it out afterwards, or if you were able to get into a clubhouse these days, that's how
a good beat writer goes into which is not my role anymore. I'm not saying I would have gotten it in 2021.
Right.
But I would have gotten it in 2011.
Right.
Like someone would have, whoever's job it is to go. My job is not currently to have personal relationships among all the players like that. But like, if you're doing your beat job well, this is another sad thing. There's so many fewer, not just a COVID issue or a Zoom issue. There's so many fewer reporters than there used to be. It's just, there's so many things the public and the fans don't get to find out that they used to find out. Maybe this would have been one of them. I don't know.
So back to my first point, it's kind of overshadowed. The Mets are playing good baseball, Andy. And another thing that we, in our second of the 3 batter rule, talked about on Baseball Night in New York last night, the Mets bullpen has been really impressive. And I think going into the year, we were comparing and contrasting the Yankees and Mets arms. And the Yankees had all these, young 21, 23-year-old guys who threw 100, and we were going to see how that worked out, it has worked out well for them. And the Mets had depth. And the starting pitching depth is now being tested for the Mets, but the bullpen has been rock solid in that you've gotten the bounce back year from one of the probably 3 question marks going into the year, and that's been Jay Familia. Dellin Betances is on the IL, and Miguel Castro's having a very good year as well. But Familia's really been the headline, where it's like his numbers are like, whoa. How much of a strength do you see that being? And with Seth Lugo set to return, it looks like it could be a legitimate super pen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much volatility in bullpens that it might look different later in the season. Remember the 2015 Met bullpen? Like Addison Reed, Tyler Clippard, there were guys contributing down the stretch that weren't even there in the big first half of the season. So it's hard to project out, but certainly terrific now. There's no reason to think that a Trevor May or Diaz is Diaz, but there's pretty much no reason to think that it's going to go bad with most of these guys. Familia could go either way. Castro looks like he's found something with, I don't know if it's Jeremy Hefner. I don't know if it's the scouts under Brody last year that identified him as a trade target from Baltimore, but that has been a good find. So yeah, it's been good. They just have to hope that it feels this way in October. If they're there.
I wonder, do you think by any chance they're considering moving Castro to being a starting pitcher?
I hadn't thought that. Why do you ask?
Let's see. There's 2 things, and sometimes you connect the dots. Sometimes it means something, and sometimes it doesn't. He now has really 3 pitches that he's using. And just like Chapman with the Yankees, we've talked about that, how he may want to start going longer, because once you have 3 pitches as a reliever, you really know that you can be a starting pitcher, and starting pitchers make more money. But this would be a team decision with Castro. They're using him as an opener when they have to, and he's got a 3rd pitch between the changeup and the breaking ball and his 98-mile-an-hour fastball. And he started as a starting pitcher in his career, like most relievers. So part of me is wondering if they're trying to stretch him out a little bit. Not that they would, move somebody out of the rotation or make that a real conscious effort, but it is something that I've thought about, that they may try and make him a multi-inning guy,
like Chad Green in his prime kind of guy. Where you could remember in 2019, Green started games for the Yankees and could easily give him 2 innings. Give him a longer stretch in the middle of a game or later in the game, that kind of thing. You're wondering.
Yeah, and I think to your point that you've made on this show and on Baseball Night in New York, it's all about innings now. We get caught up in starters, relievers, closers, setup men, 7th, 8th, 9th, but if Miguel Castro can give you 3 innings, take 2 days off, 3 innings, whatever, I know that's kind of a in between, but I don't know. It's just something I've been looking into. And
it's a question that it's a good question to ask. I don't know. That's a good question. Interesting. I would think, with the depth that they hope is coming back in Syndergaard and Carrasco, and the fact that Castro seems to be thriving in what he's doing. I don't know, but it's interesting. You're right about the repertoire, obviously.
Yeah. So to many Mets fans, it may seem like we buried the lead to our third 3-batter role and Jacob deGrom being on the injured list. And suddenly, because Carrasco is going to be a while and Syndergaard's obviously going to be a while, the rotation looks thin, as I said. The depth is being tested. David Peterson looks shaky. And you're relying on guys like Lucchesi and Yamamoto to give you quality, which is not the position you want to be in. The deGrom thing, Andy, just like the conversation we had earlier, we rely on people like you to figure out, okay, is this just a team being cautious, or why would a clean MRI lead to, 2 starts off? Well, so what's the answer to that?
Well, they still say it's tight. Obviously.
Well, like my back is tight sometimes when I wake up, but I still do everything I would normally do.
Well,
because
you could host a show on a couch with back tightness probably more easily than deGrom can pitch at a high level.
I would say sitting on a couch.
I know it's not easy with
doing 21 minutes of live television is as hard, if not harder, than throwing 9 complete innings in a big league.
I drove for 5 hours last night through the Poconos and such with back.
And you're a little tight. It's just a little tight.
Bit of a thing.
But so I get
you gotta be safe,
tight, but no MRI comes back and the doctor's got the pointer and he's got the picture on the wall and he's like, that's tightness right there. That's some bad tightness. So that's not what happened. So what did happen?
No, I don't think that shows up on the image. Good point. Being cautious. Look, if you can get to October with just using deGrom here and there, like all you need is for that guy to have a big October at some point in his career. I mean, he had some moments in 15, obviously, in October, but I'm not saying the Mets can get there without him, period, but you nurse him through as much as you need to. Because if deGrom goes out there, I'm just painting a hypothetical, but if he goes out there, misses 2 starts, goes out there, strains his lat, he's out 2 months, just forget it. Let's go Phillies. You're going to October. That's the way you can't lose that guy for like forever. So you have to nurse. So if it's like a start here, some rest, a start there. Look, he's an older pitcher. People can talk as much as they want about him being the Tom Brady of baseball, but he's not in control of that. And no one is, but the whatever happens with his body. So you've got to get, just like with Kershaw. I'm not saying just like with Kershaw, but what the Dodgers have done with Kershaw for years now, shut him down with back issues for a while, make sure he's back by October, that kind of thing. So sometimes you just have to be careful with older players.
As I'm listening to you talk, I'm realizing that it's kind of it's asking Mets fans almost to change their mindset about the team with deGrom specifically, because for the past few years, your team has not scored runs for him. You haven't seen the postseason in his prime, which has been the last 3 years. That is a shame for any Met fan, but you've at least had like the Cy Young race in August and September. You've been watching his ERA below 2. You're in awe every 5th day. Now, what you're saying, Andy, is the Mets are a good enough team to value October much, much, much more highly than anything that deGrom could do every 5th day in the month of May. Which
in May, yes.
In the past few years, it's been like our team doesn't score runs for him. Maybe we're not going to the postseason, but like at least we have him. Now you're saying, you have him. You need him to get to where you want to get. Like if he wins 5 games this year, that's okay. If he's Jacob deGrom, this level of greatness in October for 1 year and you win a ring, that's all worth it.
Well, look, what we're talking about with the bullpen depth right now, the bullpen functioning as it is, they look at Saturday's game. They use Tommy Hunter to Lucchesi to an array of other effective guys. They have the depth to win games without deGrom. For now, again, you lose deGrom until September. They're not a necessarily a top team anymore, but they still have a lot going for them. I think if you told me deGrom was out for the season, would I say the Mets are still like a wild card team? Yeah, maybe. I'd have to think about it. We'd have to like crunch those numbers or whatever. But yeah, with Carrasco and some version of Syndergaard, maybe. So yeah, you just have to make sure he's right when it matters the most. Absolutely. But I don't even know. To be fair, I don't even know if they're thinking about it that much. They're more just like, we have to get him right now. Like, you cannot run Jacob deGrom out there at anything less than 100%. You just can't. It's too stupid and risky. You're paying him too much. You're relying on him too much. Just wait until there's no tightness. You do. You have to wait until he feels really, really, really like as good as he can.
Once again, you're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast. It's brought to you by Verizon. 5G built right from the Mets, from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. So a little bit of a segue to the offensive offense. So some cool numbers from our friends at Mets Fix from Monday's edition of the Metropolitan newsletter. And this goes to Andy's point just now about deGrom. And here's why. The Mets are now 14-2 when they score 4 or more runs. Considering 23 out of 30 teams have averaged more than 4 runs per game, the club could be dominant if it gets just average offensive production. So they're averaging 3.46 runs for the season, which is 28th out of the 30 teams. That is, and I know that it's a bad stat, but that's one of those stats that you read and you're like, it's early. They haven't played a lot of games yet, and this team will score runs. Mm-hmm. The problem with being like, once they figure that out, they're going to be great, is that the pitching ebbs and flows too. So how do you view a stat like that? Because I'm reading that right now, and I'm like, okay, score runs, then they're going to be a great team. But,
I think you make a great point. The bullpen's working now. You don't want to waste those games with a bad great teams fire on both offense and run prevention at the same time, right? And teams that aren't quite as good as they should be, they go like, pitching's good, but what about the offense? But you exactly what you're saying. We don't know how it's going to play out for the Mets. Which of those it's going to be. I would have to think that those cumulative numbers have a lot to do with guys like Lindor and Smith and their horrible, horrible starts. And even Conforto struggled at the very beginning, and now he's back to himself. So they're not going to be like almost the worst offense in baseball all year. I don't think there's any chance of that. So you're right. The question is, will the pitching hold up? We don't know. Pitching's weird like that.
Yeah, that's the strange takeaway from a stat like that, because it's a stat about the bats. But the question that kind of comes to mind after you read it is, okay, will the pitching hold up? Because if the pitching is here and the bats are trying to meet that here, like it needs to happen. It probably will. But then, if Dom Smith goes through a month where he hits 400 and Jeff McNeil's hitting 300 again, and Pete Alonso's hitting the cover off the ball, Marcus Stroman and Taijuan Walker may be struggling when that's happening, and they're losing games 9-8. So you're right. As the season goes on, which is why 162 is so great as compared to last year's 60, as the season goes on, hopefully good teams, to your point, everything starts to click at the same time, which is, what hopefully the, Mets fans will want to see their team doing in the next couple weeks, because you've won 5 in a row and the team's still not hitting. So it's a good sign.
The team's good. That's why they're so deep that they can they can make up for other holes when they emerge. So right now they're still winning despite this being out of balance. Like, that's right. They won 5 in a row as of this recording. It's a good team. It's a really good Mets team.
You've won 5 in a row. You're facing the Orioles for 2 games, sandwiched with a couple off days. So let's do old school, new school. So this will be our last taping before Matt Harvey returns to Citi Field. And, look, we find ourselves talking about him a lot, Andy. And I don't know about you. I am legitimately interested in it. Like you've heard me say this. I think his storyline and his career arc is so interesting. What do you think that'll be like for him to come back and pitch here as a humbled, you would think, Baltimore Oriole sinker baller? That's basically what he is.
Well, I think that what it will be like for him. I mean, it's a great question. the Matt Harvey that I used to know is a pretty sensitive, emotional guy, despite the tough facade. So I'm sure there'll be a lot going on with him in that way. I don't know if he's humbled right now, or if he should, how to frame it. I think you could look at it as a tremendous triumph that he's in Major League Baseball right now. Obviously, a very elite place to be in the world of athletics, and somehow he's still there. When he washed out with the Kansas City Royals last year and the Angels before that, he was done. It was over. And the fact that he is competing pretty well in major leagues right now means, I don't know if he's humbled. I think you would call it triumphant.
But
the Baltimore Orioles are a lot better than the Long Island Ducks. You know what I mean? He's there on the top stage.
Right, but he is pitching like he deserves to be now, but the only reason he was given chances for the last 2 or 3 years before this is because of what he used to be.
Well, he's better now, though.
Yes, and he belongs clearly. But I think when you go through what he went through, you're giving, private sessions while unemployed to, Omar Minaya, who talked about it a couple of weeks ago on this podcast. You got to be humbled. I mean, the guy was the starting pitcher in the All-Star game and he was one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball for a handful of years.
Yeah, no, it just depends how you frame it. I would look at it like every single person in Major League Baseball is in a ridiculous triumph of their life.
Yes,
insane.
Obviously.
There's no you play for the Tigers or the Orioles or you play for the Yankees or the Dodgers. You're all winners, and he's still one of them. Then that's and I'm not trying to be flippant about it. I'm saying he's hung on. And now looks like he might not just be hanging on by a thread, but finding a new style to be a mid to back rotation starter for a couple more years or so. You remember Scott Kazmir, how after flaming out as a young ace type prospect, and not even prospect, but he pitched in the World Series with the Rays in 2008. And then he was just on the Indians and the Dodgers and the A's for years after. It's man, you're still making major league starts. You're still facing Mike Trout. That's a big deal.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's a good reminder of the stakes that we're talking about here, which basically to do this means you're in such a small minority. I sometimes find myself reminding Anthony Recker of that because he tries to be so humble about the player he was on Baseball Night in New York. And it's dude, there's a small, tiny fragment of the world's historic population that could do what you did. And
you're absolutely right that Harvey was there. And the Angels gave him a ridiculous $11 million contract based on who he used to be. You're 100% right. He was not a major league pitcher then. But you've watched him. You watched that Yankee game he pitched late in April. I'm sure. From one Connecticut sinker baller to another, you must have been impressed.
Look, yeah, so I see a lot of myself in him. Maybe that's what it is underneath it all. That
And when you first kind of got hot in the city, around when did you start at SNY? 14 or so.
Late 2014.
You made a lot of the same mistakes. Let's be honest. And now you've stabilized.
Our tables at One Oak were right next to each other.
Right.
We have a lot of similarities. One of the interesting points, the last thing that I want to mention about Harvey is that if you haven't listened to the Omar Minaya episode yet, you should, because it's really interesting talking to him about the fact that he went back to the Mets and suggested they sign him before this season.
I'm going to write about that. There'll be an article about that by the time this podcast is out, probably. I
don't know if you asked him about this, Andy, but what I thought was so interesting is examining it from, because everything's about me, my own point of view and my job. Mm-hmm. If I had gotten that headline, Mets signed Matt Harvey, it would have been obviously the lead of this show, the lead of the TV show that I host. And it would have been, wow, they're trying this again. It's the Dark Knight Returns. It's the Dark Knight Rises. It's, you try and see if he can, he needs to come back here to recapture what he once was. And Omar simplified it. He was like, yes, I would have to have been cautious with how this was viewed from a PR statement perspective, but it was just a pitcher that I thought would be a good reliever for us.
Know what?
Give baseball people credit. You're probably going to disagree with that.
I do disagree with Omar.
I do think that sometimes you got to give baseball people credit for making good baseball decisions that don't just make good storylines for the top of the 6 o'clock show. Omar really likes Matt Harvey, so maybe he's biased. Like, he's known him for a long time. He watched him pitch at UNC. Like, that part you can disagree with. But I'm just saying, like, Omar Minaya is not putting his name on the line to go back to the Mets and say this guy could be a good reliever if he doesn't believe it to be true.
No, that's absolutely right. I think the only thing I disagree with, I think in that particular instance, the scout and Omar may have been louder in his mind than like the person who's very savvy about New York media, which he is. And it may have been like, sign another righty reliever that throws 93, like that doesn't have that kind of history. But I get it. And it's true that the Mets were in a crisis of pitching. Do you remember when they put Gesellman in the rotation at some point during that? They really did. He was really in the rotation in 2020.
Well, I mean that's not that weird.
It's not that weird if it's 2017, but he wasn't getting anyone out last year, and he'd been a reliever for. Oh my God, they put Lugo in the rotation.
They but they put Matz in the bullpen, which made no sense.
Everything was all wacky.
Yeah,
but so, they need pitching, and they went and looked at Harvey, Omar, and actually, it wasn't just Omar.
It was Brent Alderson.
Brent Alderson. Did he say that on that podcast?
He did.
Okay. Well, no big reveal here then.
Nice trying to outscoop
I thought I had
podcast.
One. No, I thought I had one for you because I was going to write that later, but I guess it wasn't new. But
you're not the. I remember my first source.
Well, Bryn's still there, and Sandy likes Matt Harvey too, so I'm still got a little bit of an eye on him.
Are you spinning it towards a trade deadline?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Look. A lot of things would have to make sense for it to happen. I'm not reporting that the Mets are interested. What I'm reporting that their current scouting director, pro scouting director, who happens to be the son of the team president, who happens to have an affinity for Harvey. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, that's all you're saying. Once again, reminder to subscribe to Shea Anything Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get them. Shea Anything Podcast is brought to you by Verizon, 5G built right for the Mets and built right for Doug and his Wi-Fi. From the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Andy, thank you.
That was good.
Yeah.
That was much better than your first one where you initially seemed a little much, but that was perfect.
Thanks.
You're not wrong about my lackluster read.
It's not your job. I don't write good articles, so we all stay in our lane.
Why don't you try? Can you write an article someday for the?
Well, I used to.
Not rocket science.
I used to write articles.
I don't know.
It happened. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Andy, thank you. We'll talk to you later this week.